The horses' hooves echoed against the packed earth as Ethan Ravenscroft rode past the carved warning posts that marked the border of Orc territory, his hands steady on the reins despite the thunder of his heartbeat. He had traveled for 3 weeks through wilderness that grew progressively more hostile, leaving behind the burned remnants of his family's farm and the graves he had dug with blistered hands, seeking answers that no human settlement could provide about the plague that had swept through his village like wildfire through dry grass. The shamans of his people had failed, their herbs and prayers useless against the fever that turned skin gray and stole breath in gasping increments. But he had heard whispers in taverns and marketplaces about orc medicine, about their knowledge of diseases that predated human civilization, about cures that existed nowhere else in the known world. His younger sister lay dying in the care of a neighbor 3 days' ride behind him, and he had perhaps a week before the sickness claimed her as it had claimed their parents, their brother, everyone else in their household. Desperation had a way of making the impossible seem merely dangerous. The settlement appeared as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, a collection of sturdy wooden structures built with practical efficiency rather than aesthetic concern, surrounded by a palisade wall that spoke of a people who understood the necessity of defense. Smoke rose from multiple fires, carrying the scent of roasting meat and something herbal he could not identify. Ethan urged his mare forward, his throat tight with the awareness that he might be riding toward his death, but the alternative was watching Lily waste away while he did nothing. He had been a soldier once, before returning home to help work the farm after their father's injury, and he understood tactical assessment well enough to know his chances were poor if the orcs decided he represented a threat or an insult by his presence. The first orc who spotted him released a guttural shout that brought warriors pouring from the gates like hornets from a disturbed nest. Within moments, Ethan found himself surrounded by a circle of green-skinned fighters, each standing well over 6 feet tall, muscled like draft horses, and armed with weapons that ranged from crude iron axes to well-crafted spears. Their tusks jutted from powerful jaws, their eyes held the flat assessment of predators evaluating prey, and Ethan forced himself to remain absolutely still in the saddle, his hands raised to show they held nothing, no weapon drawn, no aggressive posture that might trigger violence. "I come seeking help," he called out, pitching his voice to carry without shouting, keeping his tone respectful. "My sister is dying of plague. I have gold to pay for medicine or healing." A massive orc with scars crossing his bare chest, like a road map of past battles, stepped forward, his hand resting on the handle of a war axe that looked capable of splitting Ethan in half with a single swing. "Humans do not come here," the warrior growled, his accent thick but his command of the language functional. "Humans bring soldiers, bring fire, bring death. I bring only myself and coin," Ethan replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I mean no harm. I seek only knowledge that might save my sister's life." The warriors muttered among themselves in their own tongue, a language of harsh consonants and rolling vowels that Ethan had never learned. Several raised their weapons, clearly advocating for immediate violence, while others seemed to be arguing for caution or perhaps questioning. Ethan kept his hands raised, his mare shifting nervously beneath him, sensing the tension in the air like an approaching storm. His life balanced on the edge of a blade, and he had no way to influence which direction it would fall. Then she stepped through the circle of warriors, and the entire dynamic shifted in ways Ethan could not immediately understand. She was younger than most of the fighters surrounding him, perhaps his own age of 23 or near enough, with the characteristic green skin of her people shading toward a warmer tone like spring leaves in sunlight. Her tusks were small and elegant rather than brutish, her features strong but possessing a beauty that transcended species in its striking symmetry. Black hair fell in a thick braid down her back, and she wore leather armor that had been crafted with both protection and mobility in mind. Her dark eyes swept over Ethan with an intensity that felt like being read in a language he had not known existed, assessing him in ways that went beyond mere threat evaluation. "He is alone," she said, speaking the common tongue with barely a trace of accent, her voice carrying an authority that surprised him. "One man on a tired horse, seeking medicine for a sick family member. Where is the army in that?" The scarred warrior who had spoken first rounded on her with clear irritation. "Karga, your father would not approve of your softness toward humans. They are not to be trusted. They smile and trade, then return with soldiers to burn our homes." Karga met the warrior's challenge without flinching, her spine straight, her chin lifted. "My father taught me to evaluate actual threats rather than shadows of past betrayals, Throck. This man has ridden into our territory knowing he would likely die for the act. That speaks of desperation, not conquest." She turned her attention back to Ethan, studying him with eyes that seemed to see past armor and pretense to whatever lay beneath. "What plague?" "Gray fever," Ethan answered, grateful beyond measure that someone was willing to listen rather than simply attack. "It swept through our settlement 6 weeks ago. Those it touches lose their color, their strength, their breath. Most die within 10 days of the first symptoms. My sister has perhaps 7 days remaining, maybe less. Our healers have no treatment that slows its progression." Recognition flickered across Karga's face, and several of the warriors exchanged glances that suggested they knew the disease he described. She stepped closer to his horse, close enough that Ethan could have reached out and touched her if he had been foolish enough to lower his hands, her gaze never leaving his face as though searching for signs of deception. "Gray fever is old," she said quietly. "It kills orcs as readily as humans when it appears. There is a treatment, but it requires ingredients that must be gathered fresh and prepared correctly. The process takes 3 days if done properly." She paused, her expression showing the weight of a decision being made in real time. "You cannot take this knowledge back to your people in time to save your sister." Ethan's heart, which had begun to hope, plummeted into despair so profound it felt physical. "Then she will die," he said flatly, the words tasting like ash. "I have failed her." "Unless you bring her here," Karga continued, and the circle of warriors erupted into protests loud enough to drown out whatever else she might have said. Throck stepped forward aggressively, his massive frame blocking Karga from Ethan's view. "Absolutely not. You cannot invite humans into our settlement, daughter of the Warchief or not. Your father will never permit such madness." "My father is currently leading our warriors on a hunting expedition, and will not return for 4 days, Karga replied, her voice cutting through the objections with the precision of a well-honed blade. "By the time he returns, we will have demonstrated whether this human can be trusted or whether my judgment was flawed. If I am wrong, you may all take great pleasure in reminding me of my mistake for years to come." She moved around Throck to address Ethan directly once more, her expression serious but not unkind. "You will bring your sister here. You will come alone with her, no other humans, no weapons beyond what you need for the road. You will submit to being watched constantly while you remain in our settlement. If you agree to these terms, I will prepare the medicine that can save her life. If you betray our hospitality or bring others after you leave, you will have started a war that will cost both our peoples dearly. You understand?" Ethan understood that he was being offered a miracle wrapped in danger, a chance where none had existed moments before, an opportunity purchased at the price of enormous trust from someone who had no reason to trust him. I understand and agree to your terms. I swear on my sister's life that I will honor your hospitality and bring no harm to your people. Humans swear many things, Throck muttered darkly, but he made no move to countermand Karga's decision, suggesting that her position as the Warchief's daughter carried weight even when her father was absent. Karga gestured toward the settlement gates. You will stable your horse and take food and water before you ride back. The journey you describe will have exhausted both you and your mount, and I will not be responsible for you dying on the return trip before you can fetch your sister. Her tone shifted into something that might have been humor if the situation had been less tense. Besides, if you are going to violate every sensible boundary and ride alone into Orc territory, the least I can do is demonstrate that we are not the savages your people believe us to be. The warriors parted reluctantly to allow Ethan to ride forward, though their weapons remained drawn and their expressions promised swift violence if he made any threatening moves. Karga walked beside his horse, her stride confident and economical, leading him through gates that had been carved with symbols he could not read, but which clearly held meaning for her people. Inside the palisade, the settlement revealed itself as far more organized and civilized than human prejudice suggested, with orderly pathways between buildings, gardens growing vegetables and herbs, children playing games that involved much running and laughing, and craftspeople working at their trades with visible skill. You expected something more primitive, Karga observed, and it was not a question. I expected to die at your border, Ethan admitted honestly. Everything beyond that is a surprise. She made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been acknowledgement of absurdity. Most humans who ride into our territory do die, because most humans who ride into our territory come with violence in their hearts and conquest in their plans. You came with desperation and courage, which are different things entirely. She directed him toward a stable where several large animals that looked like crosses between horses and cattle watched their approach with placid interest. My name is Karga Ironheart, daughter of Warchief Ironheart, student of our clan's medicine keeper, and apparently the only orc in this settlement foolish enough to believe that humans and orcs might occasionally be capable of treating each other with basic decency. Ethan Ravenscroft, he replied, dismounting carefully and with deliberate slowness to avoid startling the warriors who had followed them into the settlement. Former soldier, current farmer, and brother desperate enough to risk everything on the kindness of strangers who have every reason to hate my kind. Karga took his mare's reins and led the animal into the stable with practiced efficiency, her hands gentle as she began removing the saddle and bags. Hate is exhausting and ultimately unproductive. I have watched humans and orcs kill each other for perceived slights and ancient grievances my entire life, and the result is always the same. More graves, more grieving, more reasons for the next generation to continue the cycle. She set his belongings aside carefully, making no move to search through them, respecting his property in a way that spoke to genuine honor. I decided years ago that I would not contribute to that cycle unless given no other choice. Ethan helped her tend to his mare, working in companionable silence for several minutes as they brushed down the exhausted animal and provided food and water. His military training had included horsemanship, and he found himself moving through the familiar routine with Karga in a rhythm that felt oddly natural despite the strangeness of their circumstances. She worked with the confidence of someone who had handled horses regularly, her movements efficient and kind, and he noticed that his mare responded to her touch without fear. "Why did you decide to help me?" he asked finally, the question that had been burning in his mind since she had stepped through the circle of warriors. You risked conflict with your own people by inviting me inside your walls. Karga finished securing the stable gate before turning to face him fully, her expression thoughtful in the dimming afternoon light. Because 3 years ago, my younger brother fell through ice while fishing in winter and would have drowned if a human trapper had not pulled him from the freezing water. The trapper carried my brother 2 miles through snow to return him to our territory, then left without asking for reward or recognition, vanishing back into the forest before our warriors could decide whether to thank him or kill him. Her dark eyes held memories and old pain. My brother lived. The trapper could have left him to die, could have taken him hostage, could have done 1,000 things that would have conformed to our expectations of human behavior. Instead, he saved a child's life because it was the right thing to do, regardless of species. The story settled between them with the weight of truth, explaining motivations in ways that logic alone could not. Ethan nodded slowly, understanding the parallel she was drawing. Not all humans are monsters, and not all orcs are savages. A revolutionary concept that will likely get us both killed eventually, Karga replied with dark humor. But until that day arrives, I prefer to live according to my own judgment rather than inherited prejudice. She gestured toward a building that appeared to serve as a communal dining hall. Come. You need food before you ride back, and I need to begin gathering ingredients for your sister's medicine. The sooner you return with her, the better her chances of survival. The dining hall fell into tense silence when Ethan entered behind Karga, dozens of orc faces turning to stare at the human, who had somehow been granted entrance to their settlement. Children pressed against their parents' sides, warriors rested hands on weapons, and the atmosphere crackled with suspicion thick enough to choke on. Karga ignored the attention completely, leading Ethan to a table and gesturing for him to sit, before disappearing into what was presumably a kitchen area. Ethan sat carefully, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening, acutely aware that he was surrounded by people who could tear him apart with their bare hands if they chose to do so. An orc child, perhaps 5 years old with enormous dark eyes and tiny tusks, barely visible, peered at him from behind a table leg with the fascinated curiosity that children everywhere seem to possess when confronted with something new and strange. "Hello," Ethan said quietly, offering the child a small smile. The child squeaked and scrambled back to their mother, who pulled the little one close while fixing Ethan with a glare that promised extreme violence if he made any threatening moves toward her offspring. He raised his hand slightly in a gesture of peace and looked away, giving the mother space to feel safe. The last thing he needed was to create an incident because an orc parent perceived him as a danger to their child. Karga returned with 2 bowls of stew that smelled better than anything Ethan had eaten in weeks, setting one before him along with a chunk of dense bread. "Eat," she commanded, settling across from him with her own bowl. "You look half-starved, which will not serve your sister well if you collapse on the journey." The stew was rich and flavorful, filled with meat and root vegetables cooked until tender, seasoned with herbs that tasted familiar and foreign simultaneously. Ethan ate with the controlled speed of someone who had learned not to waste food or opportunity, aware that every moment he spent here was a moment his sister lay dying, but also aware that Karga was correct about his need for sustenance. He had been pushing himself hard for weeks, sleeping little, eating less, driven by desperation and guilt in equal measure. "Tell me about your sister," Karga said as they ate, her tone conversational rather than interrogative. "If I am going to treat her, I should know something about the patient beyond her disease." Ethan swallowed a bite of bread before answering, surprised by the request but grateful for it nonetheless. Lily is 16, brave beyond reason, and stubborn enough to drive our parents to distraction when they were alive. She wanted to be a healer, spent every spare moment learning herbs and remedies from our village medicine woman. His voice caught slightly on the memories. She was one of the last to fall sick, because she spent all her time tending to others who had already contracted the fever. By the time she showed symptoms, there was no one left with the strength to properly care for her. Karga's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She sounds like someone worth saving. She is the last of my family, Ethan said quietly. If she dies, I will be alone in a world that has already taken everything else from me. They finished their meal in silence that felt contemplative rather than uncomfortable. And Ethan noticed that some of the tension in the dining hall had eased slightly as other orcs observed that Karga was treating the human visitor with casual normalcy, rather than hostility or fear. Children still stared, warriors still watched, but the atmosphere had shifted from actively threatening to merely suspicious, which Ethan counted as significant progress. When their bowls were empty, Karga stood and collected them, gesturing for Ethan to follow. She led him through the settlement as the sun continued its descent, pointing out various buildings and landmarks with brief explanations. The medicine hall where I train is there. The Warchief's longhouse, where my father holds councils, is the largest building near the center. The forges are on the eastern side, because the prevailing winds carry smoke away from living quarters. Her tone suggested she was providing this information deliberately, trusting him with knowledge of their settlement's layout in a way that demonstrated faith he had not earned, but desperately wanted to prove worthy of receiving. They stopped at the gates, where Ethan's mare had been brought and prepared for travel by unseen hands. His saddlebags had been refilled with provisions, and a waterskin that had been nearly empty now bulged with fresh water. Karga handed him a small pouch that clinked with the sound of metal. "Those are tokens marked with our clan symbol," she explained. "If you are stopped by orc patrols on your return journey, show them these. They will know you have been granted safe passage." She paused, her expression serious. 3 days. Ethan Ravenscroft. Return within 3 days with your sister, or do not return at all. If you bring soldiers or betray our trust, I will hunt you myself and ensure your death is neither quick nor easy. "I will return in 3 days with only my sister," Ethan promised, holding her gaze so she could see the truth in his eyes. "You have my word, and I do not give my word lightly." Karga nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with whatever she saw in his face. "The medicine will be prepared by the time you arrive. Ride safely, and may whatever gods you believe in watch over your journey." Ethan mounted his mare and turned the animal toward the darkening wilderness beyond the settlement walls, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on his back as he rode through the gates. He glanced back once to see Karga standing at the entrance, a solitary figure silhouetted against the fires behind her, watching him leave with an expression he could not read from that distance. Then he turned his attention forward and urged his mare into a steady trot, beginning the desperate race back to his dying sister with hope flickering in his chest like a candle flame in the wind. The return journey passed in a blur of exhaustion and determination. Ethan rode through the night, stopping only to rest his mare when the animal absolutely required it, pushing himself beyond the limits of endurance through sheer force of will. He reached the neighbor's farm where he had left Lily in the gray hours before dawn on the second day, stumbling through the door on legs that barely supported his weight. Margaret, The neighbor who had agreed to watch over Lily looked up from her vigil beside the bed where Lily lay with eyes that held resignation and sorrow. "She has worsened," Margaret said quietly. "I did not think you would return in time." Ethan crossed to the bed and took his sister's hand, appalled by how cold her skin felt, how gray her face had become, how shallow her breathing sounded in the quiet room. "We are not finished yet," he said, injecting confidence into his voice that he did not entirely feel. "Help me prepare her for travel." Margaret's eyes widened. "Travel? Ethan, she can barely breathe. Moving her will kill her." "Leaving her here will definitely kill her," Ethan replied, already beginning to wrap Lily in blankets. "I have found someone who can treat the gray fever, but we must reach their settlement within a day. I need your wagon and your fastest horse." The older woman hesitated only a moment before nodding and moving to help him prepare Lily for the journey. They fashioned a bed in the back of Margaret's wagon, surrounding Lily with every blanket and cushion they could find to protect her from the worst of the road's roughness. Ethan hitched Margaret's draft horse to the wagon while the woman packed food and water, moving with the efficient speed of someone who had lived through enough crises to know when to argue and when to simply act. "Where are you taking her?" Margaret asked as Ethan climbed onto the wagon seat. "Somewhere that offers hope," Ethan replied, unwilling to explain more fully and knowing that the truth would likely terrify the older woman. "I will return within a week if all goes well." He drove the wagon out of the farmyard as the sun broke over the eastern horizon, beginning the careful balancing act of moving as quickly as possible while not jostling Lily so badly that the journey itself became fatal. The wagon was slower than riding alone would have been, but there had been no alternative. He could not have carried Lily on horseback for the distance required, and leaving her behind would have meant accepting her death as inevitable. The hours blended together into an exhausting monotony of watching the road, checking on Lily, and pushing forward despite the screaming protest of muscles that had not rested properly in days. Ethan stopped twice to give Lily water and check her breathing, terrified each time that he would find her gone, relieved beyond measure when he felt the faint flutter of her pulse beneath his fingers. She did not wake, did not respond to his voice or touch, and the grayness of her skin seemed to spread with each passing hour. He reached the border markers of Orc territory as the sun began its descent on the third day, having pushed through the previous night with determination born of desperation. The carved warning posts felt almost welcoming this time, representing not danger but the possibility of salvation, and Ethan urged the draft horse forward into land where humans were enemies and trespassers. The Orc patrol found him within an hour of crossing the border, 4 warriors who materialized from the forest with weapons drawn and expressions promising violence. Ethan pulled the wagon to a halt and raised the pouch of tokens Karga had given him, holding it high so the afternoon sun glinted off the metal. "I was given safe passage by Karga Ironheart," he called out, keeping his voice steady despite the fear that spiked through him. "I am returning with my sister for treatment as agreed." The lead warrior, a female orc with ritual scars marking her cheeks, approached and examined the tokens carefully before nodding. "You are expected. Follow the eastern trail to the settlement. Karga has been watching for your return since this morning." She glanced at the wagon bed where Lily lay wrapped in blankets. "Hurry. The daughter of the Warchief does not make promises lightly, and she will expect you to arrive in time for her efforts to matter." The patrol melted back into the forest as quickly as they had appeared, and Ethan drove the wagon forward along the trail they had indicated, his heart hammering with renewed hope and fear in equal measure. The settlement gates came into view as the sun touched the western mountains, and he saw Karga standing at the entrance exactly as she had been when he left 3 days earlier, as though she had not moved in all that time. She strode toward the wagon as soon as she spotted him, her expression intense and focused. "How long since she last responded to stimuli?" Karga asked without preamble, already climbing into the wagon bed to examine Lily with hands that moved with practiced competence. 20 hours, perhaps more, Ethan admitted, his voice rough with exhaustion and fear. "She grows worse with each hour." Karga pulled back Lily's eyelids, checked her pulse, placed her ear against Lily's chest to listen to her breathing, her movements swift and efficient. "She is very far advanced, but still alive. That will have to be enough." She looked up at Ethan with an expression that balanced honesty and compassion. "I have prepared the medicine, but administering it to someone unconscious is difficult. She may not survive the treatment itself, even if the medicine works as it should." "She will definitely not survive without the treatment," Ethan replied. "Please, do whatever you can." Karga nodded and called out instructions in her own language to warriors who had gathered at the gates. Several moved to help lift Lily from the wagon with surprising gentleness, carrying her into the settlement as Ethan followed on legs that threatened to buckle with every step. They entered a building that smelled of herbs and smoke, a structure clearly dedicated to healing work, with bundles of dried plants hanging from rafters and shelves, lined with bottles and jars containing substances Ethan could not identify. They laid Lily on a padded table, and Karga immediately began working with the focused intensity of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done and in what order. She mixed powders and liquids in precise measures, heated substances over a small flame, and explained each step to Ethan in a voice that remained calm despite the urgency of the situation. "The treatment requires 3 components," Karga said as she worked. "First, a paste made from root bloom fungus that grows only in caves near sulfur springs. This targets the fever itself and helps restore normal body temperature." She applied a thick, green paste to Lily's chest and throat, working it into the skin with circular motions. "Second, a tea brewed from silverleaf and mountain ash, which strengthens the heart and lungs when they have been weakened by disease." She carefully dripped the tea between Lily's lips, massaging her throat to encourage swallowing. "Third, and most important, an inhalant made from burning dried moonpetal flowers combined with specific minerals. Your sister must breathe these fumes for at least 1 hour, preferably longer." Karga set up a brazier beside the table and began heating a mixture that produced thick, white smoke with a sharp, medicinal smell. She positioned Lily's head so the smoke would wash across her face with each shallow breath, then settled beside the table with the patience of someone prepared for a long vigil. "Now we wait," Karga said quietly. "The treatment works slowly, and there is nothing more to be done except monitor her response and hope that we have not begun too late." Ethan sank onto a stool, his body finally acknowledging the exhaustion he had been holding at bay through sheer determination. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling entirely inadequate for what Karga was doing but all he had to offer. "Whatever the outcome, you have given her a chance she would not have had otherwise." "Thank me when she wakes," Karga replied, but her tone was not unkind. "Until then, all we have done is try, and trying counts for very little when measured against success or failure." They sat together in the herb-scented dimness as the smoke curled through the air and evening deepened into night beyond the building's walls. Karga checked Lily's pulse and breathing at regular intervals, adjusted the mixture burning in the brazier, and occasionally added more of the green paste to areas where it had been absorbed into the skin. Ethan watched his sister's face for any sign of improvement or further decline, his heart lurching with each irregular breath, his mind too exhausted for coherent thought beyond desperate prayer to gods he had never been certain existed. "Tell me about being a soldier," Karga said after perhaps 2 hours had passed, her voice quiet in the darkness. "How does a former warrior become a farmer desperate enough to ride alone into Orc territory?" Ethan dragged his attention away from Lily's face to look at Karga, surprised by the question but grateful for the distraction from his spiraling thoughts. "I enlisted when I was 18, served for 4 years in the border campaigns against the Northern Raiders. I was good at it, good at fighting and tactics and keeping myself alive when others died around me." He paused, remembering battles and blood and the faces of friends who had not survived. "But I was not good at making peace with what it cost. After my 4th year, my father injured his back badly enough that he could not manage the farm alone, so I took it as a sign that I should return home before war consumed whatever remained of my humanity." "You saw orcs during those campaigns?" Karga asked, her tone carefully neutral. "We fought orcs occasionally when territorial disputes turned violent," Ethan admitted. "But mostly, we fought human raiders and bandits who preyed on settlements too small to defend themselves effectively." He met her eyes across the dim space. "I killed orcs during my service. I will not lie about that or pretend otherwise, but I also killed humans who deserved death far more than the orc warriors who were simply defending their lands from encroachment." Karga nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with his honesty. "I have killed humans," she said quietly. "Warriors who came into our territory with violence in their hearts and conquest in their plans. I do not regret those deaths because they were necessary to protect my people. But I do regret that they were necessary at all, that we cannot find ways to coexist without constant bloodshed." "Your brother who fell through the ice," Ethan said. "Is he why you became a student of medicine rather than purely a warrior?" Surprise flickered across Karga's face, followed by something that might have been respect. "You are more perceptive than your exhausted state would suggest." "Yes. Watching my brother nearly die, seeing how fragile life is regardless of strength or fighting skill, made me realize that healing was as important as the ability to defend. My father was not pleased when I chose to split my training between warrior skills and medicine, but he eventually accepted that I would make my own path." They fell silent again, the conversation having created a strange intimacy in the darkness, a sense of understanding that transcended the barriers of species and history. Ethan found himself studying Karga's face in the dim light provided by the brazier, noticing details he had been too stressed to observe before. The strong line of her jaw, the intelligence in her dark eyes, the capable hands that moved with such confidence whether holding weapons or preparing medicine. She was striking in ways that had nothing to do with conventional beauty and everything to do with presence and competence and quiet strength. "Your color is changing," Karga said suddenly, and Ethan's heart leaped before he realized she was speaking to Lily, not him. He turned to look at his sister and felt hope surge through his exhausted body like lightning. The grayness that had been spreading across Lily's skin was retreating, color returning to her cheeks in slow but visible increments. Her breathing sounded deeper, more regular, less like the desperate gasping of someone drowning in air. Karga checked Lily's pulse and smiled for the first time since Ethan had returned to the settlement. "Her heart is stronger. The treatment is working." She looked up at Ethan with an expression that mixed relief and satisfaction. "Your sister is going to live." The words hit Ethan with enough force that he had to brace himself against the table, his vision blurring with tears he had not allowed himself to shed during the desperate days of travel and fear. "She is going to live," he repeated, needing to hear the words spoken aloud, needing to make them real through repetition. She will need several more hours of the inhalant treatment, then 3 days of rest before she should attempt travel, Karga continued, her tone shifting into the practical cadence of a healer providing care instructions. The fever will return in diminished form as her body continues fighting the disease, but it will not be fatal if managed correctly. I will teach you how to prepare the follow-up treatments she will need over the coming weeks. Ethan wiped his eyes and nodded, trying to pull himself together enough to focus on the practical information Karga was providing. 3 days, he said. Will your father's hunting party have returned by then? Almost certainly, Karga replied. Which means you will meet Warchief Karga Ironheart and explain to him why you are occupying space in his settlement with his daughter's blessing but without his knowledge or permission. She did not sound particularly concerned about this prospect, but Ethan felt a fresh spike of anxiety at the thought of facing an orc warchief whose territory he had invaded. Will he kill me? Ethan asked, deciding that direct questions were better than anxious speculation. Probably not, Karga said thoughtfully. My father values results more than protocols, and you have provided excellent evidence that not all humans conform to our expectations. But he will not be pleased that I made such a significant decision without his input, and he will definitely test you to determine whether you represent a larger threat to our people. Test me how? Ethan asked warily. Karga's smile turned slightly wicked. With my father, there is no way to predict. He might challenge you to single combat, or demand you prove your worth through some task, or simply interrogate you for hours to assess your character. Karga Ironheart is nothing if not creative in his evaluation methods. Ethan groaned quietly, exhaustion and relief and new anxiety churning together into an overwhelming mixture that made coherent thought difficult. I survived riding into orc territory alone twice and watching my entire family die of plague. Surely I can survive meeting your father. That optimism is admirable if perhaps misplaced, Karga said, but her tone suggested she was teasing rather than genuinely warning him of doom. For now, you should rest. I will continue monitoring your sister through the night. There is a sleeping room adjacent to this building where you can lie down without being far from Lily if her condition changes. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to insist on remaining beside his sister through the night, but his body was staging a full rebellion against the abuse he had subjected it to over the past days. His vision kept blurring, his hands shook with fine tremors, and he suspected that if he remained sitting upright much longer he would simply fall over unconscious. You will wake me if anything changes, he asked. Immediately, Karga promised. Your sister is my patient now, and I take that responsibility seriously. She will not suffer or decline without you being informed. Ethan forced himself to stand and made his way to the sleeping room Karga had indicated, finding a simple bed with clean blankets and a pillow that felt like luxury after days of sleeping on the ground when he slept at all. He collapsed onto the bed fully clothed and was unconscious within seconds, his body finally claiming the rest it desperately required. He woke to sunlight streaming through a small window and the sound of voices speaking in low tones nearby. For a moment, Ethan could not remember where he was, or why his entire body ached like he had been beaten with clubs. Then memory returned in a rush and he sat up too quickly, making his vision swim. He stumbled from the sleeping room into the healing hall to find Karga sitting beside Lily's bed, but his sister was now awake, propped up on pillows, and sipping something from a wooden cup. Ethan, Lily said, her voice weak but recognizably her own, and Ethan crossed the space between them in 3 strides to gather her into a careful embrace. "You are awake," he said unnecessarily, his throat tight with emotion. "You are alive and awake and speaking." "I am confused and strange and apparently in an orc settlement," Lily replied, but there was humor in her voice beneath the weakness. "Though I suppose that last part explains the impressive green woman who has been making me drink terrible-tasting tea, while explaining that you did something incredibly stupid and brave to save my life." Ethan laughed, the sound slightly hysterical with relief, and pulled back to look at his sister's face. Color had returned to her skin, her eyes were clear rather than fever-glazed, and while she looked exhausted and fragile, she looked fundamentally alive in a way she had not for weeks. "I may have taken some risks," he admitted. "He rode alone into our territory asking for medicine, agreed to bring you here for treatment, and has conducted himself with honor throughout," Karga said, standing and stretching muscles that had apparently been still for too long. "Your brother is either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish, and I have not yet determined which assessment is more accurate." "Both," Lily said immediately. "He has always been both in equal measure, which is how he survived the border wars without losing his mind entirely." The 3 of them settled into an easy conversation that surprised Ethan with its normalcy. Lily asked questions about the treatment she had received, and Karga explained the medicine and process with clear patience, dumbing nothing down but making sure her explanations were comprehensible to someone without training. Ethan found himself watching the 2 women interact with something warm expanding in his chest, seeing his sister alive and talking, seeing Karga treat Lily with genuine care and respect, feeling the impossible weight of the past weeks finally beginning to lift. The door to the healing hall opened without preamble, and a massive orc entered with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a space he did not own. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, his shoulders broad enough to block most of the doorway, his skin darker green than Karga's and marked with ritual scars, and what appeared to be battle tattoos. His tusks were prominent and clearly well cared for, his eyes were dark and intelligent, and he radiated authority like heat from a forge fire. "Father," Karga said, standing smoothly and without apparent concern, "you have returned early." "I have returned to discover that my daughter has invited humans into our settlement without my knowledge or permission," Warchief Karga Ironheart replied, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in Ethan's chest. "An explanation would be appreciated before I decide whether to be impressed by your initiative or furious at your presumption." Ethan stood carefully, positioning himself slightly between Grom and Lily's bed without making the gesture overtly threatening, his soldier instincts rising to assess the enormous orc as a potential danger that would need to be countered, despite the obvious futility of attempting to fight such a physically superior opponent. Grom's eyes tracked the movement with clear interest, and Ethan had the distinct impression he was being evaluated in ways that went far beyond surface assessment. "This is Ethan Ravenscroft and his sister Lily," Karga said calmly. "Ethan rode into our territory 5 days ago seeking treatment for gray fever. I agreed to provide medicine in exchange for his word that he would come alone and honor our hospitality. He has done both, and Lily is recovering as expected." Grom moved further into the room, studying Lily with the same intense assessment he had given Ethan. "Gray fever is dangerous and spreads easily. You risked exposing our people to plague by allowing infected humans into our settlement." "I took appropriate precautions, as you taught me," Karga replied without flinching before her father's displeasure. The disease was far enough advanced that Lily was past the contagious phase, and I have been monitoring everyone who has had contact with either human for any signs of infection. There have been none. And if you had been wrong, Grom pressed, if half our settlement fell sick because of your choice, then I would have been wrong and dealt with the consequences of my decision, Karga said evenly, but I was not wrong. The risk was calculated and acceptable, and the outcome has been positive for everyone involved. Grom studied his daughter for a long moment before something that might have been pride flickered across his expression. You are your mother's daughter for better and worse. She also had a tendency to make enormous decisions based on her own judgment and then dare me to argue with her results. He turned his attention to Ethan. You are a soldier. It was not a question, but Ethan answered anyway. I was. 4 years in the border campaigns. I left service 3 years ago to help my father with our farm. Why ride alone into Orc territory? Grom asked. You had to know it would likely result in your death. Because the alternative was watching my sister die slowly while I did nothing, Ethan replied honestly. I would rather die attempting to save her than live with the knowledge that I had not tried everything possible. Grom nodded slowly, apparently finding this reasoning acceptable. And now that she lives, what are your intentions? Will you return to your people and tell them that orcs can be exploited for their medicine? Will you bring others seeking healing we do not wish to provide? I will return to rebuild my farm and care for my sister, Ethan said. What I tell others about my experience here depends on what you permit me to say. I gave my word to honor your hospitality, and part of that honor is respecting your wish for privacy if that is what you desire. Clever answer, Grom observed. You have a diplomat's tongue beneath a soldier's exterior. He crossed his arms, his massive frame somehow making the healing hall feel smaller. My daughter believes you represent an opportunity to demonstrate that humans and orcs can interact without immediate violence. I am less convinced of this possibility, but I am willing to acknowledge that your behavior thus far has been honorable according to the terms Karga established. He paused, his expression becoming stern. You will remain here for 3 days as Karga recommended, allowing your sister to regain strength before travel. During this time, you will both be watched constantly. If you betray our trust in any way, the consequences will be severe and permanent. Do you understand? Completely, Ethan replied. Thank you for permitting us to remain and recover. Grom grunted, apparently satisfied with the exchange, and turned to leave before pausing at the doorway. Karga, you will present yourself at the Longhouse this evening to discuss your decision-making process in greater detail. Your judgment was sound in this instance, but you cannot continue making choices that affect the entire clan without proper consultation. Yes, Father, Karga said, her tone respectful but not submissive. The Warchief departed, leaving behind a silence that felt charged with various tensions and reliefs. Lily released a breath she had apparently been holding. He is terrifying, she said quietly. He is a Warchief who has kept his people alive and prosperous for 20 years, despite constant threats from multiple directions, Karga replied. Terrifying is part of the job requirements. She smiled slightly. But he did not kill either of you or throw you out of the settlement, which means he has tentatively accepted your presence. That is more than I hoped for, honestly. The next 3 days passed in a strange suspension of normal reality. Ethan and Lily remained primarily in the healing hall, with Karga teaching them both how to prepare the follow-up treatments Lily would need over the coming weeks. The process involved grinding dried herbs, mixing precise ratios of ingredients, and understanding which symptoms required which remedies. All information that Karga shared with the generosity of a teacher, who genuinely wanted her students to succeed. Orc settlement members came and went, initially with suspicion but gradually with what appeared to be curiosity. Children peeked through windows to stare at the humans. Warriors stopped by to assess potential threats, and several of the clan's elders interviewed Ethan and Lily with questions that ranged from practical to philosophical. The humans were being evaluated constantly, their every word and action weighed against Orc expectations and prejudices, and Ethan found the experience both exhausting and oddly hopeful. On the second day, Lily was strong enough to walk short distances, and Karga offered to show them more of the settlement if they wished to venture beyond the healing hall. They walked slowly through pathways between buildings, with Ethan supporting his sister when she tired, and Karga explaining various aspects of Orc culture and daily life, with the patience of someone who understood that ignorance was not the same as malice. Your people believe orcs are primitive savages who live in squalor and violence, Karga said as they passed a workshop where an orc craftsman was creating intricate metalwork. But we have art, music, literature, complex social structures, and technologies your people would benefit from learning. The prejudice runs both directions, of course. Many orcs believe all humans are weak, deceptive, and interested only in conquest and exploitation. Some humans are exactly that, Ethan admitted, just as I suspect some orcs conform to human prejudices. True, Karga agreed. But judging entire peoples by their worst examples while ignoring their best seems counterproductive for everyone involved. She led them to a garden where various plants were growing in careful organization. This is where I harvest many of the ingredients for medicine. The root bloom fungus that saved your sister's life grows naturally in caves, but we have learned to cultivate it in controlled environments, so we are not dependent on dangerous harvesting expeditions. Lily examined the plants with the intense interest of someone who had wanted to be a healer before plague had destroyed her entire world. "Would you teach me more about orc medicine?" she asked. "Our human healers have knowledge, but clearly there are things you understand that we do not." Karga looked surprised by the request, then pleased. "If you wish to learn, I am willing to teach. Knowledge should be shared, not hoarded like gold in a treasury. Perhaps someday you will teach human healing techniques in return, and both our peoples will be better for the exchange." They returned to the healing hall as Lily's strength flagged, and Ethan helped her settle back onto her bed before stepping outside to give his sister time to rest. He found himself standing in the afternoon sunlight, watching orc children play games that involved much running and laughter, observing daily life in a settlement that should have been alien and threatening, but instead felt oddly peaceful. Karga joined him after several minutes, moving to stand beside him with comfortable silence that required no immediate filling. "You are thinking," she observed. "I am thinking that everything I believed about orcs was wrong," Ethan replied honestly. "Not entirely wrong, perhaps, but wrong enough that I feel foolish for never questioning what I had been taught." "Most people never question what they are taught," Karga said. "It requires either significant bravery or significant desperation to look beyond inherited wisdom and evaluate the world based on personal experience rather than cultural expectation." She paused. "You had both when you rode into our territory alone." Ethan turned to look at her, struck again by the intelligence in her dark eyes, the strength in her features, the competence she radiated in everything she did. "You saved my sister's life and probably mine as well, since I would not have survived losing her. I have no way to repay such a debt." "I require no payment," Karga replied. "Healing is what I do, and your sister deserved to live regardless of her species or your ability to compensate me for my efforts." She met his gaze with an intensity that made his heart beat faster. "But if you wish to honor the gift of her life, you could consider being someone who works to bridge the gap between our peoples rather than widening it further." "I am a farmer with no influence and no authority," Ethan said. "What could I possibly do to affect how humans and orcs interact?" "You could tell the truth about what you experienced here," Karga suggested. "You could refuse to participate in violence against orcs when such violence is not defensive. You could raise your sister to understand that intelligence and honor exist in all peoples, not just her own." She smiled slightly. "Small actions by individuals create the foundation for larger changes in cultures. You do not need to be a king or a warchief to make a difference." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding what she was asking and finding himself willing to commit to such efforts despite the challenges they would undoubtedly present. "I will do what I can," he promised. "Though I suspect my neighbors will think I have lost my mind if I start advocating for better relations with orcs." "Probably," Karga agreed. "But having people think you are crazy is far less permanent than being dead. Which is what would have happened if you had not been willing to take risks based on desperate hope, rather than certain knowledge." They stood together in the afternoon light, and Ethan felt something shifting in his chest, something that went beyond gratitude and respect into territory that terrified him with its implications. He was attracted to Karga, drawn to her in ways that transcended physical appearance, and reached toward something fundamental about who she was as a person. The realization should have been absurd given that they had known each other less than a week and belonged to species that were supposed to be enemies. But Ethan had learned over the past days that what was supposed to be true often bore little resemblance to what actually existed. "What happens after we leave?" he asked quietly. "Will I see you again? Or is this a temporary arrangement that ends when my sister is well enough to travel?" Karga was silent for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "That depends on many factors beyond either of our control. My father is cautiously allowing this situation to unfold, but he will not permit regular human visitors to our settlement without significant cause. Your people would likely react poorly if they knew you were maintaining contact with orcs. There are practical obstacles that make ongoing interaction difficult regardless of personal desire." "But you have not said it would be impossible," Ethan observed. "Because I do not believe it is impossible," Karga replied. "Merely difficult and potentially dangerous for both of us." She turned to face him fully. "Why are you asking?" Ethan Ravenscroft, he could have deflected, could have claimed he was simply curious about future possibilities, could have protected himself from potential rejection by refusing to admit the truth of what he was feeling. Instead, he chose honesty. "Because I find myself not wanting this to end when Lily recovers. Because I have enjoyed talking with you, learning from you, existing in your presence in ways that have nothing to do with species or culture and everything to do with who you are as an individual." He paused, gathering courage. "Because I am attracted to you in ways that probably make no sense and definitely violate every social convention of both our peoples." Karga's expression shifted through surprise into something softer, more vulnerable, more uncertain than he had seen from her before. "I am attracted to you as well," she admitted quietly. "Which is inconvenient and complicated and probably foolish given all the reasons such attraction is impractical." She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wished, and took his hand in hers. Her palm was warm and calloused, her grip strong but gentle. "But I have never been particularly good at doing what is practical when my heart insists on other directions." Ethan tightened his grip on her hand, feeling something click into place in his chest like a key turning in a lock. "What do we do about this?" he asked. I have no idea, Karga said honestly. Interspecies relationships are not forbidden in orc culture, but they are rare and often complicated. Your people have stronger prejudices against such unions from what I understand of human culture. My people are not here, Ethan pointed out. And I stopped caring what others thought of my choices when I decided to ride alone into orc territory, seeking medicine from people I had been taught to fear and hate. Karga smiled, the expression transforming her face into something radiant. Then perhaps we proceed carefully, honestly, and with awareness that we are creating something new rather than following established patterns. Perhaps we see where this attraction leads without forcing it into shapes that do not fit. She squeezed his hand gently. Perhaps we simply spend time together and learn whether what we feel now is genuine connection, or merely the intensity of extraordinary circumstances creating artificial intimacy. I can agree to that, Ethan said, relief and hope and excitement churning together in his chest. Though I should warn you that I am not particularly good at careful and cautious when it comes to things I want. I had noticed, Karga replied with dry humor. The riding alone into enemy territory was a significant clue to your approach to problem solving. They stood together as the sun continued its descent, hands linked, hearts opening to possibilities that should have been impossible, but felt more real than most of the certainties Ethan had believed throughout his life. The moment was interrupted by Lily calling from inside the healing hall, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks, and Ethan reluctantly released Karga's hand to return to his sister. The third day arrived with clear skies, and the understanding that Ethan and Lily would be leaving the following morning. Lily was strong enough now to walk without support for reasonable distances. Her color had returned fully, and while she still tired easily, Karga assured them both that continued recovery was simply a matter of time and proper care. They spent the day preparing for departure, with Karga providing detailed instructions and enough prepared medicine to last through the next month of treatment. That evening, Grom summoned Ethan to the Warchief's longhouse for a private conversation. Ethan went with understandable nervousness, uncertain what the massive orc leader wanted to discuss, but aware that refusing such a summons would be both rude and stupid. The longhouse was impressively large, its interior decorated with weapons, furs, and carved wooden panels depicting what Ethan assumed were significant events in clan history. Grom sat in a large chair that served as a throne, watching Ethan enter with eyes that missed nothing. "Sit," the Warchief commanded, gesturing to a smaller chair across from his own. "We should speak plainly about matters that affect more than just you and your sister." Ethan sat carefully, his posture respectful but not submissive. "I am listening." "My daughter has become attached to you," Grom said bluntly. "I am not blind and I am not a fool. I have watched her watch you, observed how she smiles when you speak, noticed that she touches you more frequently than mere medical care requires." He leaned forward, his expression stern. "Karga is my only daughter, the child of my heart, and I will not permit her to be hurt by a human who cannot or will not honor what he has begun." "I have no intention of hurting Karga," Ethan replied carefully. "But I also cannot predict what challenges we will face if we choose to pursue a relationship that crosses every boundary our peoples have constructed." "Honest answer," Grom acknowledged. "But honesty about uncertainty is not the same as commitment to persevere despite difficulty." He studied Ethan with the intensity of someone evaluating a potential threat or ally. "What are you willing to endure to build something genuine with my daughter? Rejection from your community, danger from those who believe interspecies relationships are abomination. The constant struggle of existing between two worlds while fully belonging to neither." Ethan met the Warchief's gaze steadily. I rode alone into Orc territory, knowing I would likely die, because saving my sister mattered more than my fear. If I can do that for family, I can certainly endure social disapproval and cultural prejudice for someone I am coming to care about deeply in a remarkably short time. He paused. I am not saying the path will be easy or that I have all the answers. But I am saying that I am willing to try to persevere, to build something new rather than accepting that existing barriers are insurmountable. Grom leaned back in his chair, something that might have been satisfaction crossing his features. You have courage, Ethan Ravenscroft, and you have honor. Those qualities are more important than species when evaluating someone's worthiness. He was quiet for a moment before continuing. I will not forbid Karga from pursuing this connection if it is what she wishes. But I will also not make it easy, because anything worth having requires effort to obtain and maintain. You will need to prove your commitment through sustained action rather than pretty words. I understand, Ethan said. And I appreciate your willingness to consider possibilities rather than simply rejecting them based on prejudice. My wife was from a different clan than my own, Grom said quietly. Our union was questioned and criticized by those who believed clan loyalty should supersede personal choice. We proved them wrong through 20 years of partnership before she died defending our people from raiders. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. If my daughter has found someone worthy of her heart, I will not stand in her way simply because that someone happens to be human rather than orc. But he will need to demonstrate that he is indeed worthy, repeatedly and consistently, or he will answer to me personally. The threat was clear but not unreasonable, and Ethan nodded his acceptance. I will endeavor to be worthy of your daughter's regard and your trust. See that you do, Grom replied. Now go. Spend your last evening with Karga and your sister. Tomorrow you leave, and the real test of your commitment begins when you are no longer surrounded by our protection and must face your own people with truth about where you have been and who you have come to care for. Ethan left the longhouse with his mind churning through the conversation's implications. Grom had essentially given his blessing for Ethan to pursue a relationship with Karga, but had also made clear that such pursuit would be evaluated constantly, and that failure would carry serious consequences. It was more than Ethan had expected and exactly what the situation required. A balance between permission and accountability that respected both Karga's autonomy and her father's protective instincts. He found Karga in the healing hall with Lily, the two women talking quietly about various medicinal herbs and their applications. Lily looked up when Ethan entered and smiled knowingly. Did Father Warchief threaten you with creative violence if you hurt his daughter? She asked with the bluntness of a younger sister who knew her brother too well. In essence, yes, Ethan admitted, though he phrased it more diplomatically than you just did. Karga stood and moved to stand beside Ethan, her expression mixing amusement and exasperation. My father has all the subtlety of a boulder rolling downhill. I hope he did not terrify you too badly. He terrified me exactly the appropriate amount, Ethan replied. But he also gave his tentative approval for us to explore whatever this is between us, which is more than I anticipated. This is between you, Lily repeated, looking between Ethan and Karga with raised eyebrows. You have developed romantic feelings for each other, in less than a week, apparently, Ethan said, feeling oddly defensive. Is that so strange? It is absolutely strange, Lily replied. But given that this entire situation is strange, I suppose developing feelings for the impressive orc woman who saved my life is just additional strangeness on an already very strange pile. She smiled genuinely. I approve, for what my opinion is worth. Karga is intelligent, kind, competent, and clearly cares about you based on how she looks at you when you are not paying attention. Karga had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I do not stare, she protested. You absolutely stare, Lily countered. But it is very sweet staring, so I am not complaining. They spent the evening together, the three of them talking and laughing in ways that felt natural despite the strangeness of their circumstances. Lily eventually fell asleep on her bed, exhausted by the day's activities, and Ethan and Karga stepped outside to walk through the settlement under a sky brilliant with stars. I am afraid, Karga admitted quietly as they walked. I am afraid that you will leave tomorrow, and the difficulties of maintaining contact will prove too challenging. I am afraid that your people will turn against you when they learn where you have been. I am afraid that I am setting myself up for heartbreak by allowing myself to care for someone I cannot easily be with. Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I am afraid too, he said honestly. I am afraid of all the same things and probably a dozen more. But I am also excited and hopeful and more alive than I have felt in years. You make me want to be brave, Karga. You make me want to challenge prejudices and break down barriers and build something new. He raised one of her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. So I propose that we be afraid together while moving forward anyway, because the alternative is letting fear control our choices. Karga's eyes shone with unshed tears. You are either very brave or very foolish. Both, Ethan replied, echoing what Lily had said days earlier. I am definitely both. She stepped closer, her free hand rising to touch his face with a gentleness that contrasted with her obvious strength. I do not know if this can work. I do not know if the obstacles we will face are surmountable, but I want to try. I want to see if what I feel now is real and lasting or just the result of extraordinary circumstances. Then we will try, Ethan said simply. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and kissed her with a tenderness that felt like a promise. Karga kissed him back, her arms wrapping around him, pulling him close in an embrace that felt like coming home to a place he had never known existed. They stood together under the stars in the heart of orc territory, a human and an orc, two people who should have been enemies but were instead becoming something else entirely, something new and fragile and full of impossible possibility. When they finally separated, both breathing harder, Karga rested her forehead against his. You must go tomorrow. Your sister needs to return to familiar surroundings and you need to rebuild your farm and your life. But this is not goodbye, Ethan Ravenscroft. This is merely the beginning of something that will require significant effort to maintain. How do we stay in contact? Ethan asked practically. I cannot ride into orc territory every week without someone noticing and asking questions I may not want to answer. Karga thought for a moment before responding. There is a place, roughly halfway between your farm and our settlement, where a river runs through a small valley. Willow trees grow along the banks. It is neutral territory, unclaimed by either orcs or humans. I will meet you there 7 days from now at midday. We can talk, spend time together, figure out how to make this work. 7 days, Ethan repeated, committing the information to memory. The valley with willow trees midday, I will be there. They stood together a while longer, reluctant to end the evening, before finally returning to the healing hall where Lily still slept peacefully. Ethan lay down on the bed that had been provided for him, but sleep came slowly as his mind churned through everything that had happened, everything that might happen, all the ways this could go wonderfully right or terribly wrong. Morning arrived too quickly. Ethan and Lily prepared to leave with mixed feelings, grateful for the healing and hospitality they had received, but also sad to be departing. Karga had prepared a pack with medicine, instructions, and additional supplies for their journey, her efficiency masking whatever emotions she felt about their departure. The settlement gathered to watch them leave, dozens of orcs who had gradually shifted from suspicious to curious about the humans in their midst. Grom stood at the gates, his massive presence commanding attention. "You have been guests in our settlement," the Warchief said formally. "You have been treated with honor and have conducted yourselves with honor in return. You leave with our tentative good will and the understanding that what has begun here is fragile and requires careful tending from all involved. Thank you for your hospitality and for saving my sister's life," Ethan replied, matching Grom's formality. "We will speak well of the kindness we have been shown and work to honor the trust that has been extended to us." Grom nodded, apparently satisfied with this response, then gestured for them to depart. Ethan helped Lily into the wagon and took his seat, picking up the reins of the draft horse that had carried them here. He looked back once to see Karga standing near the gates, watching him leave with an expression that mixed sadness and hope and determination. He raised his hand in farewell. She returned the gesture, and then he turned his attention forward and guided the wagon out of the settlement into the wilderness beyond. The journey back to human territory passed without incident. They traveled slowly to accommodate Lily's still recovering strength, stopping frequently to rest and continuing the medicine regimen Karga had prescribed. Lily asked many questions about what had happened between Ethan and Karga, and Ethan found himself explaining the connection that had formed, the conversations they had shared, the feelings that had developed despite all logic suggesting such feelings were impossible. "You love her," Lily observed on the second day of travel. Ethan considered denying it, then realized there was no point in lying to his sister or himself. "I am falling in love with her, yes." Which is complicated and potentially foolish, and definitely not something I anticipated when I rode into orc territory seeking medicine. "Will you see her again?" Lily asked. "I plan to," Ethan replied. "Whether I succeed is another question entirely, but I intend to try." They reached Margaret's farm on the third day, and the older woman nearly wept with relief when she saw Lily alive and recovering. "I did not think you would return," Margaret admitted. "I thought you had gone off to die with some crazy hope rather than watch your sister waste away." "I went off to find help from an unlikely source," Ethan corrected. "And I found it, though the explanation is complicated and unlikely to be believed." He did not tell Margaret the full truth about where they had been, or who had treated Lily, sensing that such honesty would create more problems than it solved. Instead, he spoke vaguely about finding a hermit healer in the wilderness who knew treatments for gray fever, which was close enough to truth to satisfy casual curiosity, without revealing details that might endanger Karga or her people. They returned to their farm the following day, and Ethan felt his heart clench at the sight of burned fields and damaged buildings. The plague had not only killed his family, but had also resulted in fires that had consumed their crops and compromised structures. Rebuilding would take months of hard work, but at least now he had reason to rebuild, with Lily alive and recovering rather than another grave to dig beside their parents. The days fell into a rhythm of physical labor and careful tending to Lily's continued recovery. Ethan threw himself into repairing damage, clearing burned fields and preparing for eventual replanting. Neighbors came by occasionally, offering assistance and asking questions about where they had been and how Lily had recovered. Ethan maintained his vague story about a hermit healer, and most people accepted the explanation without pushing for details. too grateful that someone had survived the plague to interrogate the specifics of their cure. 7 days after leaving the orc settlement, Ethan rode out in the early morning toward the valley with willow trees that Karga had described. He told Lily he was going to check their northern property line, which was not entirely a lie but certainly not the complete truth. His sister had smiled knowingly and told him to give her regards to the impressive orc woman, making Ethan wonder exactly how transparent his feelings actually were. The valley was easy to find, a peaceful depression in the landscape where a river ran clear and cold between banks lined with graceful willow trees. Ethan arrived as the sun approached its zenith and dismounted to wait, his heart hammering with nervousness and anticipation. He had no guarantee that Karga would come, that she had not changed her mind in the days since they had parted, that the obstacles between them had not already proven too significant to overcome. Then she emerged from the trees on the opposite bank, riding a large animal that resembled a horse but was clearly bred for orc riders, and Ethan felt relief and joy surge through him with enough force to make him slightly dizzy. Karga dismounted and crossed the shallow river with easy confidence, water splashing around her legs, and then she was standing before him with a smile that made all the uncertainties and fears fade into insignificance. "You came," she said, sounding relieved. "Of course I came," Ethan replied. "Did you think I would not?" "I considered the possibility," Karga admitted. "The past week gave you time to reconsider, to remember all the reasons this is complicated and difficult. I would not have blamed you for deciding the challenges outweighed the benefits." Ethan stepped forward and pulled her into an embrace, holding her close and breathing in the scent of herbs and leather, and something uniquely her. "I spent the past week rebuilding my farm and thinking about you constantly. The challenges are significant, but you are worth the effort required to overcome them." They spent the afternoon together, talking and simply existing in each other's presence. Karga shared news from her settlement. Ethan described the progress on his farm, and they both acknowledged the strangeness and difficulty of trying to build a relationship across such significant barriers. But they also laughed together, held hands, kissed beneath the willow trees, and made plans to meet again in another week at the same location. The pattern repeated over the following months. Every 7 days, Ethan would ride to the valley and Karga would meet him there, and they would steal a few hours together in neutral territory where neither humans nor orcs were likely to stumble upon them. They learned about each other gradually, sharing stories and dreams and fears, building foundation of understanding and trust that went beyond the initial attraction into something deeper and more sustainable. Lily recovered fully, her strength returning along with her irrepressible spirit. She began studying the medicine techniques Karga had shared, practicing with local herbs and building knowledge that made her valuable to their small community. When neighbors fell ill or injured themselves, Lily was increasingly the person they sought for treatment, and she never mentioned where she had learned some of her more effective techniques. Autumn arrived, bringing harvest and the hard work of preparing for winter. Ethan had managed to plant late crops that would provide enough food to see them through the cold months, and the farm was beginning to recover from the devastation of plague and fire. He found himself thinking about the future with a hopefulness that had been absent for years, imagining possibilities that included Karga in ways he did not entirely know how to articulate, but felt real nonetheless. On a crisp autumn afternoon, 6 months after first riding into orc territory, Ethan met Karga at their usual valley location, and found her waiting with an expression that suggested she had something important to discuss. "My father is hosting a gathering of several orc clans in 2 weeks," Karga said without preamble. It is a seasonal tradition, a time for trade and negotiation and strengthening of alliances. He has suggested that I might invite you to attend as my guest." Ethan stared at her, uncertain he had heard correctly. "Your father wants me to attend an inter-clan orc gathering. Why would he suggest such a thing?" "Because he has been watching our relationship develop, and he believes that if you and I are serious about building something lasting, you need to understand orc culture more fully," Karga explained. "You have seen my settlement briefly under crisis circumstances, but you have not experienced how orcs interact socially, how we celebrate, how we conduct ourselves when not focused on survival or defense." She paused. "He also wants other clans to see that humans can interact with orcs without violence, that we are capable of treating each other as individuals rather than enemies." "That sounds dangerous for everyone involved," Ethan observed. "What if the other clans react badly to my presence?" "That is a risk," Karga acknowledged. "But my father believes it is a risk worth taking, and he will ensure your safety while you are under his protection. You would be a guest of the Warchief, which carries significant weight in orc culture." Ethan considered the proposal, weighing risks against potential benefits. Attending such a gathering would deepen his understanding of Karga's people and culture, would demonstrate his commitment to their relationship, and might contribute to building bridges between humans and orcs in ways that went beyond two individuals meeting secretly in neutral territory. It would also be dangerous and potentially disastrous if things went wrong. "I will come," he decided. "If you want me there, I will attend your father's gathering." Karga's smile was radiant. "I want you there. I want you to see me in my own culture, among my own people, as I actually am rather than the version of myself I present in secret meetings. And I want my people to see you, to understand that you are worthy and honorable and more than their prejudices suggest humans can be." The 2 weeks before the gathering passed quickly. Ethan prepared his farm for a brief absence, ensured Lily would be safe and well supplied during his time away, and tried to manage his nervousness about attending an event where he would be the only human among potentially hundreds of orcs. Lily thought the entire plan was either brilliant or insane, possibly both, and made him promise to return safely. "If you do not come back, I will learn enough orc medicine to march into their territory and resurrect you purely, so I can kill you myself for being stupid," Lily threatened with the peculiar logic of younger siblings. Ethan rode toward orc territory with growing trepidation as the day of the gathering arrived. He met Karga at their usual valley, and she accompanied him the rest of the way to her settlement, their progress observed by multiple orc patrols who clearly knew to expect them. The settlement had been transformed since his last visit, with additional structures erected to house guests, banners flying from poles, and an atmosphere of festival preparation that suggested significant effort had been invested in making the gathering impressive. Grom met them at the gates, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "Ethan Ravenscroft, you honor us by accepting our invitation despite the risks involved. You will be under my protection during this gathering, which means any harm directed toward you will be considered harm directed toward me personally. However, I cannot control what others think or say, only what they do. You will need to endure criticism and prejudice with grace if you wish to change minds rather than confirm existing beliefs." "I understand," Ethan replied, "and I appreciate the protection and the opportunity." The gathering began that evening with a feast that involved more food than Ethan had seen in one place in his entire life. Multiple clans had sent representatives, dozens of orcs filling the central area of the settlement, eating and drinking and conducting the sort of social interactions that happened whenever disparate groups came together for celebrations. Ethan sat beside Karga at a table near where Grom presided, acutely aware that he was the object of significant attention and speculation. Several orc leaders approached throughout the evening to question Ethan, their inquiries ranging from hostile to curious. He answered honestly, explaining how he had come to the settlement seeking medicine, how Karga had saved his sister's life, how he had gradually come to understand that orcs were people rather than monsters. Some of his questioners seemed satisfied with his responses. Others remained skeptical, but none offered violence despite the clear temptation some felt. Karga stayed close to him throughout the evening, her presence both supportive and protective. She introduced him to various clan members, explained customs and rituals so he would not inadvertently offend anyone, and generally served as translator between his human perspective and orc culture. Ethan found himself grateful beyond measure for her guidance, and increasingly awed by how seamlessly she navigated between different social groups, how respected she clearly was by her own people. The gathering continued for 3 days, with various events and activities that allowed clan members to trade, negotiate, compete in physical contests, and strengthen relationships. Ethan participated where appropriate and observed when participation was not welcomed, learning more about orc culture in those 3 days than he had absorbed through years of military service, fighting against orcs he had never bothered to understand. On the final evening of the gathering, Grom called for attention and addressed the assembled orcs in his own language, his voice carrying across the crowded space. Ethan could not understand the words but could read the seriousness in the Warchief's posture, the significance in how other orcs listened with rapt attention. After several minutes, Grom switched to the common tongue, apparently translating at least some of what he had said for Ethan's benefit. "We have hosted a human in our settlement for these past days," Grom said, his voice grave. "Some of you questioned this choice, argued that it represented dangerous softness toward a species that has caused our people significant harm over generations. I understand those concerns because I share them. Humans have burned our homes, killed our children, stolen our lands." He paused, letting the weight of history settle over the crowd. "But this human is not responsible for those crimes, just as we are not responsible for the crimes of orcs who have harmed innocent humans. Ethan Ravenscroft came to us desperate and honest. He honored our hospitality, and he has demonstrated through consistent action that he views us as people worthy of respect rather than monsters to be feared or conquered." Grom gestured toward where Ethan sat beside Karga. "My daughter has chosen to build a relationship with this human. I have watched their connection develop over months, observed how they treat each other with genuine care and respect, seen how he has worked to understand our culture rather than demanding we conform to his expectations. I believe their relationship represents a possibility, a chance that humans and orcs might someday learn to coexist without constant violence." The Warchief's expression became stern. "I am not suggesting we abandon caution or forget history. I am suggesting that we evaluate individuals based on their actions rather than inherited prejudice. Ethan has proven himself worthy of my daughter's regard and my tentative trust. Whether he proves worthy of broader acceptance from our people will depend on his continued behavior in the months and years ahead. But I believe he should be given that opportunity, and I will support my daughter's choice to pursue this connection." The speech concluded, and Grom sat down to mixed reactions from the assembled orcs. Some nodded in agreement, others looked skeptical. A few appeared openly hostile to the suggestion that humans could be trusted in any context. But no one rose to challenge the Warchief's pronouncement, and Ethan understood that he had just been given something enormously valuable: public acknowledgement and tentative acceptance from Grom, which provided legitimacy to his relationship with Karga in ways that secret meetings never could have achieved. Karga took his hand beneath the table, her grip tight with emotion. "My father just told every important orc leader in this region that he supports us," she whispered. "That was a significant risk for him politically, and he took it because he believes you are worthy." "I will work every day to prove him right," Ethan whispered back, overwhelmed by the trust being extended to him. The gathering concluded the following morning with the various clans departing to return to their own territories. Several orc leaders approached Ethan before leaving, offering cautious words of acknowledgement or tentative invitations to visit their settlements if he proved trustworthy over time. One older orc female, who Karga identified as a respected elder from a northern clan, studied Ethan with penetrating intelligence before speaking. "You have been given a rare gift, human," the elder said. "The opportunity to build bridges between our peoples, to demonstrate that coexistence is possible. Do not waste it through carelessness or betrayal. Many eyes will be watching to see whether you are genuine or merely clever deception." "I understand the responsibility," Ethan replied respectfully, "and I will honor it to the best of my ability." The elder nodded slowly. "See that you do. The future of relations between our species may depend on whether you and the Warchief's daughter succeed or fail in your unprecedented relationship." After the gathering ended and the various clans had departed, Ethan prepared to return to his farm. Grom pulled him aside for a private conversation before he left, the Warchief's expression serious. "You have done well these past days," Grom said bluntly. "You handled scrutiny and prejudice with grace, you showed respect for our culture without being obsequious, and you did not embarrass my daughter or myself. That is worth acknowledging." "Thank you," Ethan replied, uncertain what else to say. "But the easy part is finished," Grom continued. "What comes next will be harder. You will need to face your own people with honesty about where you have been and who you have been spending time with. You will need to endure their disapproval and prejudice just as you endured ours. And you will need to decide how committed you are to Karga, because she deserves complete commitment or none at all." "I love your daughter," Ethan said quietly, the words feeling both momentous and simple. "I want to build a life with her if she will have me, regardless of the obstacles we will face." Grom studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Then you have my blessing to pursue that life, with the understanding that if you hurt her, no distance will be far enough to escape my vengeance." "Understood," Ethan agreed, taking the threat seriously while also recognizing it as an expression of fatherly love. He rode away from the orc settlement feeling simultaneously exhausted and energized, overwhelmed and hopeful. The gathering had been intense and challenging, but it had also demonstrated that change was possible, that humans and orcs could interact without immediate violence, that bridges could be built between peoples who had been enemies for generations. Autumn deepened into winter, and Ethan continued meeting Karga at their valley location, whenever weather permitted. They talked about the future increasingly, discussing possibilities and practicalities, trying to imagine how they might build a life together when such lives had no precedent or template to follow. "I cannot live full-time in your settlement," Ethan said during one of their winter meetings. "Not because I would not wish to, but because my farm represents Lily's future security, and I cannot abandon it entirely." "And I cannot live full-time in human territory," Karga replied. "My responsibilities to my clan require my presence, and I would be in constant danger if I tried to exist among humans who view orcs as monsters to be killed on sight." They sat in frustrated silence, the problem seeming insurmountable despite their mutual desire to overcome it. Finally, Karga spoke with hesitation in her voice. What if we built something new? A place on the border between our territories, a homestead that belonged to neither humans nor orcs but to us specifically. A place where we could live together while maintaining connections to both our peoples. Ethan considered the proposal, turning it over in his mind. It would be dangerous. We would be isolated from both communities, vulnerable to attack from those who disapproved of our relationship. Yes, Karga agreed. But we would also be creating something unprecedented, demonstrating that such coexistence is possible. And if we succeeded, we might inspire others to follow our example. Your father would permit such an arrangement? Ethan asked. I believe so, especially after his speech at the gathering, Karga replied. He has publicly supported our relationship, which means he would look weak if he then forbade us from finding ways to make it work. They discussed the idea throughout the winter, gradually refining it from vague concept into practical plan. They identified a location on the border between territories, a place with good land and access to water that was technically unclaimed by either humans or orcs. They began making preliminary preparations, gathering materials and resources, planning a structure that would incorporate both human and orc architectural techniques. Spring arrived with the promise of new beginnings. Ethan told Lily about his plans to build a homestead with Karga, and his sister responded with enthusiasm that surprised him with its wholehearted support. You have been happier these past months than I have seen you in years, Lily said. If Karga makes you happy, then you should build a life with her regardless of what others think. Besides, I am nearly 17 now and perfectly capable of managing the farm with hired help when needed. You do not need to sacrifice your happiness out of misplaced obligation to me. It is not misplaced, Ethan protested. You are my sister and my responsibility. I am your sister and your equal, Lily corrected. You saved my life and I will be forever grateful, but I do not want that gratitude to become a cage that keeps you from pursuing your own happiness. Go build your homestead with your impressive orc woman, and I will visit regularly to ensure you are not making terrible decorating choices. Ethan shared the news with neighbors carefully, telling them he was planning to establish a new homestead on unclaimed border land, omitting the detail about who he would be building that homestead with. Some neighbors thought he was foolish to abandon established land. Others admired his pioneering spirit. None questioned his right to make his own choices. He met Karga in early spring to begin construction of their home. They worked together over the course of 2 months, building a structure that combined human woodworking techniques with orc stonework, creating something that belonged to both cultures while being uniquely their own. Grom sent several orc workers to assist with the heavier construction, while Lily hired human craftsmen to help with finishing work, and gradually, a home took shape in the border wilderness. It was not large or elaborate, but it was well built and comfortable, with separate spaces for different activities, and a design that allowed for future expansion. They dug a well, cleared land for gardens and eventually crops, built a barn for animals, and created something that felt solid and permanent rather than temporary or makeshift. On a warm spring evening with the homestead essentially complete, Ethan and Karga stood together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. This is real, Karga said quietly. We have actually built something together. Did you doubt we would? Ethan asked. Sometimes, Karga admitted. The obstacles seemed overwhelming at moments and I questioned whether love was enough to overcome all the practical difficulties. But we persevered, and now we have a home. Ethan turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I want this to be more than just a home we share temporarily. I want it to be our home permanently, the place we build our life together for however many years we are given." He took a deep breath, his heart hammering. "I want you to be my wife, Karga. I know our peoples do not typically marry across species, and I know there is no official authority that would recognize such a union as legitimate. But I do not care about official recognition or cultural tradition. I care about you, and I want to make a formal commitment that we are choosing each other deliberately and permanently." Karga's eyes filled with tears, though her smile was radiant. In Orc culture, marriage is less about official ceremonies and more about public declaration of commitment before witnesses who matter. "If you are asking me to make that declaration, to stand before your people and mine and announce that we choose each other despite all obstacles, then my answer is yes." They held each other as the sun completed its descent, and stars began appearing in the darkening sky. This moment felt like an ending and a beginning simultaneously. The conclusion of months of struggle and uncertainty, the start of something new and unprecedented. They planned a ceremony for midsummer, deciding to hold it at their homestead and invite members of both their communities. The planning was complicated by the reality that many humans would not attend once they learned they would be celebrating alongside orcs, and many orcs would refuse to participate in a ceremony that honored a human-orc union. But some would come, and those who came would be the people who truly mattered. As summer approached, invitations were extended carefully. Lily immediately agreed to attend and help organize the practical aspects of the ceremony. Grom announced he would be present along with several members of his clan. Margaret, the neighbor who had helped care for Lily during the plague, agreed to come despite her nervousness about being surrounded by orcs. Several orc leaders who had attended the gathering months earlier sent messages indicating they would attend to observe this unprecedented union. Some human neighbors responded to news of the ceremony with hostility, calling Ethan a traitor to his species, and threatening violence against him and any who attended his mockery of a proper wedding. Some orcs declared that Karga was dishonoring her people by binding herself to a human, arguing that she should be exiled for such betrayal. The negative responses hurt, but Ethan and Karga had expected them and refused to let prejudice control their choices. The ceremony took place on a perfect midsummer afternoon, with wildflowers blooming and a gentle breeze keeping the temperature comfortable. Perhaps 40 people attended, roughly evenly split between humans and orcs, gathering in the cleared area in front of the homestead that Ethan and Karga had built together. The atmosphere was tense initially, with humans and orcs eyeing each other warily, but no violence erupted and gradually the tension eased into cautious coexistence. Grom officiated, as was his right as Warchief and Karga's father. He spoke in both languages, addressing both peoples present, his voice carrying gravity and significance. "We gather to witness a union that has no precedent in the memory of any living here today. A human man and an orc woman have chosen each other deliberately, have worked to understand and respect their different cultures, have built a home together despite all obstacles that sought to prevent such building." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled witnesses. "Some of you believe this union is wrong, an abomination that violates natural order. You are welcome to your beliefs, but you are not welcome to enforce them through violence or coercion. Ethan Ravenscroft and Karga Ironheart are making their choice freely, and that choice deserves respect even from those who disagree with it." The Warchief turned to face Ethan and Karga directly. "Do you, Ethan Ravenscroft, choose Karga Ironheart as your wife, your partner, your companion through whatever joys and hardships the future holds. Do you commit to honoring her, supporting her, and working daily to make your union strong and lasting? I do, Ethan said clearly, his voice steady despite the emotion churning in his chest. I choose Karga deliberately and permanently, and I will spend my life proving myself worthy of her trust and love. Grom nodded, then addressed his daughter. Do you, Karga Ironheart, choose Ethan Ravenscroft as your husband, your partner, your companion through whatever joys and hardships the future holds? Do you commit to honoring him, supporting him, and working daily to make your union strong and lasting? I do, Karga replied, her voice firm and full of conviction. I choose Ethan deliberately and permanently, knowing that our path will be difficult but believing it is worth every challenge we will face. Then by the authority vested in me as Warchief of the Ironheart clan, and in the presence of witnesses from both your peoples, I declare you bound together in marriage, Grom announced. May your union be strong, your love enduring, and your example inspiring to those who witness it. Ethan pulled Karga into an embrace and kissed her thoroughly, aware that they were being watched by dozens of eyes, but caring only about the woman in his arms, his wife, his partner, his future. The assembled witnesses erupted into applause and cheers that mixed human and orc voices in ways that felt hopeful and significant. The celebration that followed involved food from both cultures, music that blended human and orc traditions, and conversations between peoples who had rarely interacted without violence. It was not entirely comfortable, and tensions flared occasionally, but no fights erupted, and by the evening's end, several humans and orcs were talking animatedly about trade possibilities and cultural exchanges that might benefit both communities. As the sun set and guests began departing, Lily pulled Ethan aside for a private conversation. You did it, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You actually built something beautiful and unprecedented out of desperation and courage. We did it, Ethan corrected. I would not have survived without you, and Karga would not have treated me if you had not been dying. We are all part of this story. Lily hugged him tightly. Be happy, big brother. You deserve happiness after everything we have endured. Grom also approached before leaving, his massive presence somehow less intimidating than it had been when they first met. You have honored my daughter and my trust in you, the Warchief said simply. Continue to do so, and you will always have the protection and support of the Ironheart clan. Thank you, Ethan replied, for everything. For allowing me to live when I first rode into your territory, for supporting Karga's choice to help us, for giving our relationship your blessing. I will spend my life proving worthy of that trust. Grom nodded and departed, leaving Ethan and Karga alone at their homestead, surrounded by the remnants of the celebration, standing at the threshold of the life they had chosen to build together. They went inside as darkness fell, lighting lamps and moving through spaces that now belonged to both of them equally. Karga turned to face Ethan in the gentle lamplight, her expression mixing joy and wonder and deep contentment. We are married, she said, as though testing the reality of the words. We actually did this. We did, Ethan agreed, pulling her close. Despite every obstacle, despite all the voices telling us it was impossible, we built something real and lasting. They stood together in the home they had created, two people from different species and cultures who had chosen love over prejudice, courage over fear, hope over despair. Their path forward would not be easy, and they both knew challenges awaited them that they could not yet imagine. But they would face those challenges together, building a life that proved coexistence was possible, that love could transcend boundaries, that new patterns could be created when old ones proved inadequate. Outside their windows, The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of earth-bound creatures, but bearing silent witness to a union that changed what was possible. A human and an orc, a man and a woman, two people who had refused to accept that inherited prejudice had to define their future. They had ridden into each other's lives through desperation and need, and emerged with something far more valuable than either had imagined possible. Their story was just beginning, but the foundation was solid, built on trust earned through consistent action, respect developed through genuine understanding, and love that had proven stronger than all the forces arrayed against it. Whatever came next, they would face it together, partners in truth, husband and wife, pioneers charting territory that no one before them had successfully navigated. And that, ultimately, was enough. Not easy, not simple, not guaranteed to succeed without significant continued effort. But enough. More than enough. Everything they needed to build a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, a future worth creating despite all who insisted such futures were impossible. They had proven the doubters wrong, and they would continue proving them wrong every day for the rest of their lives. Together, always together, come what may.